Hello, welcome to the next in our series of Women in the Bible. Today we're drawing from a number of women, both real and figurative, who we find in the book of Luke. The first two women are from Luke chapter 8 and verses 1 to 3. These are the ladies Joanna and Susanna. Joanna, which is a name that means Yahweh's gift. She was the wife of Chusa, the steward of Herod Antipas. Holding such an important position, Chusa would have earned a good salary. It's pretty fair to reason that he would have provided Joanna with a nice home and every available luxury of that day. Yet, when Joanna met Jesus, he healed her of an unrecorded illness or perhaps an evil spirit that controlled her life, according to Luke chapter 8 and verse 2. And from that, Joanna made a self-sacrificing decision. She chose to risk her comfortable lifestyle in order to become a follower of Jesus Christ. Life was difficult for the women who served Jesus and his disciples. Yet Joanna joined these women in giving unselfishly, not only of her time and energies, but also of whatever money she had to support the Lord's work. Joanna went to Jesus' tomb on the early Sunday morning following the crucifixion. She is listed as one of the women who reported the resurrection of Jesus to the 11 disciples. Joanna could have lived out her years focusing on the luxuries and privileges provided by her wealthy and influential husband. Instead, she was willing to give up her mansion on earth for the mansion in heaven she knew would be hers when she committed herself to Christ. Joanna was privileged to be among the last at the cross, as well as among the first to witness the empty tomb and to proclaim the Lord's resurrection. She stands in history as a woman with position and possessions whose devotion to her Lord is exemplified in humble service. We also see here Susanna. Susanna's name means lily, and she was one of the many women who followed Jesus in his city-to-city ministry. Like Mary Magdalene and Joanna, Susanna had been healed by Jesus of either a debilitating illness or perhaps evil spirits. She then became a leader among the women who served Jesus and his disciples and supported them financially. Jesus loved and respected this band of devoted women. He valued them and obviously appreciated their generous and selfless giving. His actions toward women repeatedly expressed appreciation for their God-given abilities. He taught the women just as he taught the men. Luke records the words of the two men who addressed the women at the empty tomb with a reminder of the words Jesus had taught them while in Galilee about his crucifixion and resurrection. Luke chapter 24 and verse 8. Jesus wanted women to be involved in God's work, and in his brief ministry, he laid the concrete foundation on which women have faithfully built for the last 2 millennia. I want to turn our attention now to a woman, not an individual character, but rather a woman appearing in a parable, that of the woman who lost the coin in Luke chapter 15 in verses 8 to 10. This is the second of 3 parables in which Jesus clearly pictured God's loving concern for each individual sinner. After first telling about a shepherd in Luke 15, 3 to 7, he gave an example with which the women in his audience could readily identify. It described a woman who loses one of her 10 silver coins, worth about a day's wage, according to Matthew 20 verse 2. These coins, which she wore as a headdress, represented her savings and probably formed part of her dowry. At issue was not only the value of the coin, but also the fact that losing part of her dowry would be a shameful thing. Jesus pictured her living in a peasant's house, which would have a low doorway and few or no windows. To find the coin, she lit a lamp and diligently swept every nook, listening for the coin's telltale clink and watching for its gleam in the lamplight. When at last she found it, her joy knew no bounds. She rushed to tell her friends the wonderful news and called them to rejoice with her. Jesus then applied the parable by declaring the joy that the angels share together with God when sinners return in repentance to Him. The self-righteous scribes and Pharisees in His audience clearly lacked this joy, according to Luke 15:2. But God's gracious acceptance was wonderful news to the ordinary women and men who heard Him. Luke 15 and verse 1. The final character in this study is the persistent widow. We read about her in Luke chapter 18 in verses 1 to 8. Jesus was discussing the coming of God's kingdom on earth in Luke chapter 17 and verse 20 to 37, declaring that His return would be sudden and without warning. In the meantime, He encouraged His disciples to continue praying persistently for God's justice to be manifested, so that the wrongs of this present evil age would be righted with triumph for His people. Luke 18 verses 1 and verses 7 and 8. To make His point, Jesus gave the example of a widow, Luke 18, 2 to 5. Widows were often among the most vulnerable people in Jewish society, and apparently this one had no other family member to help plead her case. The wicked, arrogant, unjust judge was probably a Gentile official. He despised the woman and her cause, and clearly considered her a nuisance. Nevertheless, He finally granted her request, not because He cared about her or her just cause, but because she disturbed Him with her persistent pleas. The parable's central teaching is not that believers need to badger a reluctant God to meet their needs. After all, God and the unjust judge are opposites. Rather, if even an unjust judge will occasionally give justice, how much more will the righteous, loving judge of all the earth hear the persistent cries of His distressed people? When the proper time comes, He will suddenly and speedily avenge them. Thus, women and men should remain steadfast and persistent in prayer as they await His coming. Thanks very much.